Good evening and welcome to Moving Together. I'm your host, Art Alexander. You're watching Moving Together on Black Community Television, BCTV Cablesystems Channel 23. In coming months on BCTV, we'll be bringing you locally produced programming as well as programs produced by black producers and filmmakers from other parts of the country. We'll also be bringing you nationally televised black programming via satellite. In coming weeks here on Moving Together, we'll be looking primarily at Portland's black community. We'll also be looking at news and entertainment from regional, national, and international black communities. We hope you enjoy the program, and we hope you let us know by dropping us a line at the address that will be provided at the end of this program. Our first story this evening deals with housing in Northeast Portland. In particular, monies designated for neighborhood improvement through the Agency of Housing and Community Development. Northeast Portland is the home of the greater portion of Portland's black community, and now a sizable percentage of Southeast Asian and Cuban refugees reside there. It is a lower income area, and while a far cry from the ghettos of an urban metropolis, there are still many problems. Among those, housing. While renters are an issue unto themselves, the lower income property owners in Northeast feel particularly pressured. They're straining under the weight of taxes and the high costs of maintenance and improvements for their homes and neighborhoods. In the past, being low income and non-white meant you usually received skimpy remains of state and federal assistance programs. Now, there are people working to change that situation. Linda Johnson is currently the director of The Crib, a child care and educational project, but for the past 2 years she has been actively involved in Northeast neighborhood development. Part of those 2 years, Linda spent as chairperson of the 25-member Citizens Advisory Task Force. They developed a needs and uses statement for some $3 million of housing and community development funds. The task force came together for a number of reasons, which included the feeling that Northeast Portland was perhaps being given short shrift when it came to neighborhood improvements monies.
Well, one thing about the housing and community development dollars is that they have to be spent in HCD neighborhoods or neighborhoods that were HCD but are on maintenance. One of the questions that was asked very strongly by the committee is the fact that the HCD neighborhoods were not generally on the list of receiving general funds money. That's monies that are regenerated within the city, where in order to get certain improvements in the community, they would more than likely utilize HCD dollars rather than general fund dollars. Sure, there's a long waiting list, but we know that the federal dollars that are coming into the state and into Portland are going to be declining. So we were making sure that the Bureau looked at the fact that if there were items that could be purchased with general funds monies, that be a first option, because the communities that are identified at HCD should have the option of going in general fund and using the HCD dollars as a supplement over and above what is necessary that they cannot afford out of general funds.
There are 2 weekly black community newspapers in Portland, the Portland Observer and the Scanner. Both papers are always working hard to improve their coverage of black community issues. One of those papers has taken the step of expanding its operation and moving to a new site. We recently visited with Scanner publisher Bernie Foster for the grand opening of the new Scanner facility. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations on your new office site, and I guess I want to know how it feels to move to a new facility.
Well, great, Art. Great. It's real great. I'm very, very delighted, very happy. But it's a funny thing. Everybody give me the credit. But it's not myself, it's wonderful people that you just saw that coming back through here. They're perhaps one of the integral part of our whole operation. And also, I couldn't have done it without the support of this particular community. We started in 1975, and since then we've had, 2 different moves. In each move, we tried to expand. But again, the basic of it is that we had the support of the community. We had tremendous help from people like Portland Development Commission, Pat LaCrosse. We had people, the support of some of the local banking institutions. And obviously with these inflation the way it is today, it's really important to package anything. So I think, with that kind of help and with that kind of support, obviously we can be where we are today.
If you were to look at a map of Africa for, say, 1945, you would see a continent ruled almost entirely by foreign powers. Today's map of Africa shows a continent that has achieved almost total political independence. African Liberation Day is the day set aside by African Americans to celebrate that progress. Moving Together visited the 10th annual celebration of African Liberation Day here in Portland. Whether by armed struggle or by political agitation, a luta continua. The struggle continues. The struggle now is focused on the white racist regime controlling Southern Africa, Azania, and Namibia. That was the theme of this year's African Liberation Day celebration. The day began with a gathering at the King Neighborhood Facility for the parade. The parade was led this year by the young people of the Jasmine Community Marching Band. The second contingent in the parade marched and chanted about the specific purpose of the day, Africa for Africans, and the end of imperialism and white racism at home and abroad. Black Studies is a discipline that came into its own after the black urban rebellions of the 1960s. But over the last 5 or 6 years across the country, there's been a decline in administrative support for Black Studies. That is to say, professors have been dropped, budgets have been restricted, and in effect, African American studies are being squeezed out of existence. The Black Studies Department at Portland State University just encountered this phenomena, and we talked with the Black Studies Department Chairman, Bill Little. Dr. Little, during the last round of state budget cuts, Portland State University was asked to make some program cuts, and it wound up that the entire Black Studies Department was put on the chopping block. How did that happen?
The reason for the proposal to eliminate Black Studies was due to the budget shortfalls. And the Vice President wanted to make sure that any program would have to justify itself as being a viable program in order to continue to be at Portland State University. So therefore, he felt that Black Studies, Women's Studies, and other programs ought to be looked at and at least defend themselves in order for continuation in the university.
What was the effect of all of this on the Black Studies Department itself?
Well, it was somewhat of a devastating effect in terms of faculty morale, student morale, and however, we came out of it relatively well with relatively minor consequences. The only major consequences of any note is the fact that we will probably lose our economist, Malaku. He will be taking a leave of absence next year with the assumption of might coming back and he might not. And so we are in a delicate situation in terms of filling the vacancy, since Malaku is one of the truly outstanding scholars in the area.
In 1979, the Portland School Board, under pressure from the black community, agreed to make a number of changes in its policies. Among those changes were an end to racially discriminatory busing practices and the restoration of all grade levels to the black community. Another one of those changes promised was the inclusion of African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and Native American cultures in the Portland Public Schools curriculum. My guest in the studio is Halim Rassan, Chairman-elect of the Portland School Board Monitoring Advisory Committee. Halim, could you tell us a little bit about what your committee does in relation to the school board and the promises it made?
Okay, the committee is made up of representatives from various organizations as well as neighborhood groups. The responsibilities of the committee is to monitor multicultural instruction as it relates to the curriculum. We're supposed to monitor teacher hiring as well as principal hiring and ensure that those things are put into the system and that kids adequately get a reflection of multicultural history.
I sort of stated it simply as I introduced you. Did I catch everything that the school board was supposed to do over the past 3 years?
Right.
How good a job have they done?
Well, in terms of what has taken place with the curriculum, in terms of what we wanted, in terms of quality education, in terms of achievement levels, that sort of thing is not happening. There really hasn't been any significant changes that have taken place since the monitoring committee has been in effect. The multicultural history is certainly not reflective and not accurately stated in the materials that the school district puts out. The consultants that have been brought here, the black consultants, national consultants that have been recommended to bring in and to really help create a realistic point of view in terms of African contributions have not really been used like they should have been.
Among those that have been brought to Portland, are there any of particular note that the general public might be aware of?
Oh, sure. There have been. The chief consultant for the Portland Public School District is Dr. Asa Hilliard, and Dr. Hilliard is probably regarded as one of the top 10 black historians in the world. He is the chief consultant. There have been a number of other outstanding consultants that have come in the area of social studies, Dr. John Henry Clark. There have been other consultants that have been brought in, for instance, in science and math. The most recent consultants were Professor Bernice Lumpkin and Dr. Hunter Adams from the University of Chicago.
I'll just keep on trying. I'll just keep on trying. Keep on trying. I'll just 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 keep on trying, trying. I'll just keep on trying. I'll just keep on trying. Keep on trying. I'll just keep on trying. I'll keep on trying. I'll just keep on trying. Keep on trying. I'll just keep on trying. Keep on trying.
Now, here's Lenny Edwards and Anu Doma with Third World in Focus.
Hello, I'm Lenny Edwards.
And I am Anu Doma. This is Third World in Focus.
On June 7th, the Central African nation of Chad saw the fall of the government of President Gokuni Wodeye in the latest phase of the longest civil war in the history of independent Africa. The FAN, the Armed Forces of the North, under the leadership of former Defense Minister Hissene Habre, took the capital city of N'Djamena in 3 hours with very little fighting. The ousted President Wodeye fled to neighboring Cameroon, where he received political asylum. Habre, a Paris-educated lawyer and the new leader of this nation of 4 million people, has asked the former colonial power France for aid in the rebuilding of the nation and its economy, which have been almost destroyed by the long civil war. France still has economic interests in Chad. The northern 2/3 of the country is arid desert, but the southern third is dense tropical land which produces cotton. The fall of the Wodeye government came despite the presence of 3,000 OAU peacekeeping troops which were in Chad. It is ironic that Wodeye's government should fall on June 7th, as the OAU had given him until June 10th to hold talks with Habre aimed at ending the 15-year civil war.
We'd like to begin this edition of Moving Together with some poetry by Portland poet and writer Robert Tabb. The poem is called Timbuktu. It traces the journey of an African youth from the countryside to the city and from his home country to New York. Here's Robert Tabb with Timbuktu.
Timbuktu, Mustafa, Mustafa, a pipe full of dreams to smoke all night until daylight raises the shade on me. Mustafa, radio with Mustafa half asleep, head cocked to the sky, flowing above with stars and angels, half asleep, a shepherd in a bed of ashes. Mustafa, the radio tunes into everything, something new to be heard and snatches songs out of the air from years back. Mustafa Toreg. He stared long and hard out into the dark. The surface of the image broke into fragments. Each grain took its shape and pulled apart from the next, like the surface of a pond broken by a stone. Light reflected in every grade of agitation. He was immersed in it, his ears plugged, sounds, colors whirling in his head until there was nothing. His head in a blinding dome of light. Mustafa, Popeye radio. Mustafa heard, bad news travels fast. The white man is coming. Nigga be damned, son of Ham. Pick the cotton, shine the shoes, suck up sorrow and sing the blues, Nigga be goddamn, son of Ham. Mama, Bama, Mama, Bama, Mama, Bama, Alabama, Bama, Lama, Mama, Bama, Alabama. Bam.
A new and we hope permanent fixture to the cultural scene of Afro-American Portland is the Jasmine Community Marching Band. That marching band is the culmination of the drive, determination, and dreams of one Thara memory.
I even had some physical reasons of wanting to keep in shape and wanting to see, other cats that play stay in shape too. That's what kept me in shape for 14 years.
Playing in marching band?
Yeah. All the running and the marching. I'm talking about hard. I'm not talking about no play now. I'm not talking about come out there and walk up and down the field. I'm talking about hard. I'm talking about snap and drive, 90-degree angles when you're not blowing, 45-degree angles when you're playing. And double time. Tempos, the tempo.
You like marching bands?
That's what I read. Yeah. But, see, y'all don't understand. Woody Shaw played in a drum corps. He talks about it all the time in magazines and everything. Everybody done played in marching band or a corps. I mean, that's any kind of musician that's worth anything. I mean, that's where you learn how to work with other people. You don't learn that on the bandstand. There's a lot of conniving going on the bandstand.
That was 3 years ago. Thara Memory, composer, arranger, trumpet player, and conductor of the Creative Jazz Ensemble, decided that Portland needed a marching band. And not just any marching band, but one that came out of the black Southern marching band tradition. First, he tried adults, both professional and amateurs, and achieved a measure of success. But he found his heart and mind were much more interested in black community youth. And so, literally out of nothing, he and community volunteers are molding a group of untrained youngsters into a band that can represent the black community and African American culture with pride. The youngsters rehearse twice a day at 5:30 a.m. and 4 p.m., and they've already won 2 or 3 awards for marching bands here in Portland. At present, the band is seeking support from the black community and the Portland community at large. The support is sought in the form of money, volunteer time, and instrument donations. One definite source of support for the Jasmine Marching Band is James Dupriest, conductor of the Oregon Symphony.
Anytime you find community involvement at this level where you can get young people interested in a disciplined and yet fun enterprise, it deserves the support of everybody. I know how difficult it is to get young musicians now interested in music, and to have the discipline that's required, and the hard work and dedication and the involvement of the parents and everything that I've heard about the band is very exciting. That's one of the reasons I wanted to come out to hear them.
About 4 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting Ghanaian master drummer Obo Adi. At that time, he expressed a desire to put together a band made up of Africans and Americans and bring Ghanaian music to the United States. Well, it's finally happened. Obo Adi has put together his band. It's called Kukrudu, and they've put out an album. Moving Together was invited to Obo Adi's Ghanaian interpretation of an album release party. The idea was to treat the release of the album like the birth of a newborn child. And for Obo Adi, his first LP, after some 20-odd years in the business, is a child that he's been carrying around in his mind for quite some time. In most traditional ritual or ceremony, it is the drummer, as much the priest, that leads or conducts the event. Ceremonies almost always begin with a processional to the site of the event, and then there's dancing and music that states, "We have arrived, let us celebrate our arrival," before we begin the ceremony. For the past 5 years, KBOO 90.7 FM, listener-supported, non-commercial radio, has held a concert called Metro Jazz. Metro Jazz is a concert of Portland's finest jazz artists. Moving Together visited Metro Jazz, and we'll be presenting segments on a future edition of the program. But we decided to give you just a taste of Metro Jazz, starting out the way Metro Jazz did, with a word from the host of the longest-running jazz program in Portland, Mr. George Page.
As you know, this is probably one of the better ways to support this radio station, that a lot of us have put a lot of energy in, those of you sitting out there, and some of us that will be up here today.
And if you were there that day, you saw a lead-off group that consisted of Janice Scroggins on keyboard.
These next two men.
There was Thara Memory on trumpet. Sonny King was there on alto saxophone. Lester McFarland on bass. And that is Bruce Carter back there on drums. You also saw Mary Ann Mayfield along with her quartet. It was the Ron Steen Trio with special guest artists, and of course Ronnie tearing it up. Tom Grant was there with his group, along with featured artist Shirley Nanette.
You're gonna spread your wings.
On the very first edition of Moving Together, we visited with one of Portland's 2 black weekly newspapers, The Scanner. At that time, The Scanner had recently expanded its operations and moved to a brand new facility. On this edition of Moving Together, we visit the other of the 2 weekly black newspapers here in Portland, the Portland Observer. The Portland Observer is embarking on its own new venture, its first annual awards banquet. Here's Moving Together reporter Lenny Edwards with that story.
On Friday, July 16th, the Portland Observer held its first annual awards banquet at the Portland Hilton. Among those chosen by the Observer to receive awards, 2 of Portland's outstanding figures in the black community, Linda Williams and Ronnie Herndon, were chosen as Woman and Man of the Year. Ronnie Herndon, organizer and co-chair of the Black United Front, received his award on the strength of his long-standing commitment to community service, which was highlighted by his role in the struggle with the school board over the relocation of the Tubman Middle School.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Man of the Year, Ron Herndon. Don't tell me you're at a loss for words.
No, not yet. Not yet. I would like to thank Al McGilberry, the other people at the Observer, the photographer here, Richard Brown, Gloria Fisher, and all the other individuals at the paper who have bestowed this award. I think that all of us really owe a great deal of credit to the Observer for what it has done over the years, providing our community with a source of news that we wouldn't have. So I think it would be fitting if we all gave them a round of applause for what they have done for all of us.
Linda Williams, chosen as Woman of the Year, is a reporter for the Oregonian. Her news stories of the possum incident, in which Portland police officers engaged in harassment of a local black-owned business, her coverage of City Hall, the police department, and community reaction to Mayor Ivancy's proposed war on crime have served to make Linda a person who is not only a newswoman, but a woman newsworthy in her own right.
Currently, she is the Oregonian City Hall reporter, and I feel very honored to have her as a colleague. She is also the Portland Observer's Woman of the Year. Linda Williams.
Thank you all very much. I have to listen to politicians, people like Commissioner Charles Jordan all the time, so I was delighted when Ed said that I would get to say something tonight.
The highlight of the evening for the hundreds gathered to honor Portland's own was the keynote address by Congressman Ron Dellums of California. Congressman Dellums has been a consistent black voice in the nation's legislature for over a decade. His talk gave ample demonstration of his convictions, his ability as a representative of the people, and his agenda for the future of the nation.
Our problems will not be solved moving to the right. We have to move to the left to survive in this country and in the world, and I believe that very powerfully and very profoundly. Cannot move into the 21st century backing into the 19th century. It just will not work. So I would like to summarize briefly. We are presently building a monument to military madness. We are spending billions and billions of dollars building weapons that will ultimately destroy us. We are withdrawing from a commitment to address the human misery of people. We are creating the potential for chaos in this country. We're withdrawing from a commitment to address the human misery of third world people. We're an insecure people. If we want to be competitive, then let's be competitive over who can best address the human misery of our people in this country and millions of third world people around the world, not who can best build capacity to destroy all life.
One of the things necessary for the advancement of any individual in any career or discipline is a system of support and education that comes from others who've been in the field longer or who are simply there with you. I have as my guests in the studio this evening two members of the Black Women's Network of Portland, Denorsia Price and Joyce Travers, and I guess I'd like to start off by asking, why is there a Black Women's Network? I suppose some of that is kind of obvious. The professional areas and the unions to an extent are still predominantly white males, but why a Black Women's Network?
We formed about 2 years ago as a support system for black women who needed counseling, assistance or knowledge about housing, education, employment, and training. We have as our motto, I think Joyce has it right there, she's going to read it for us, our motto for the Black Women's Network.
Our motto is taken from Marion McLeod Bethune. I leave you love, I leave you hope. I leave you the challenge of developing confidence in one another. I leave you respect for the use of power. I leave you faith. I leave you racial dignity. The Black Women's Network is something that we felt we needed to have because we are more sensitive to what black women need than groups that are in the area.
If you could address the specifics of the formation of the organization, was it a case of several women sitting down and realizing that they've all run into the same problems? Was there a Black Women's Network that somebody knew about someplace else, and this was sort of a chapter or an independent, comparable organization? How did it exactly start here in Portland?
There was a group of women in Seattle, and I was not involved in the Portland Black Women's Network at that time. So 4 women from Portland got together with her and said that we need something like that here because we're so scattered. We don't know where other black women are, and we have similar problems. So those 4 women got together a mailing list of other black women that they know or knew, and those people gave them a list of black women that they knew, all professional women, and we all got an invitation to the first meeting.
As a youngster, I wasn't into music traditionally like you would think of a child taking serious lessons and studying it in depth. I was more or less the rugged type where I was taking things like baseball and football and interested in sports in general. Music was something I just fooled around with and didn't take seriously.
Hello, I'm Art Alexander, and welcome to Moving Together. Ever since our arrival in this hemisphere, African Americans have been involved in not only the transmittal of African culture, but the interpretation of European culture. In this edition of Moving Together, we'd like to present one of our community's finest interpreters of European classical music, Mr. Asamar Glenn. We'll present his music, speak with him, and hear some more. Now, here is the music of Asamar Glenn.
school in Oakland, California. And I was in jazz workshops there, and there were times when the teacher would make comments, very chauvinistic comments about for example, Mary Lou Williams was a very good female musician. You know, you look at him kind of funny. He says, you know, there's another girl that was playing with me. I said, did you hear that? I said, yeah. But overall, it's something that I wanted to do, just to play music. And I really didn't prepare myself to do anything else but be in music. So it's a do or die situation with me.
There's still oppression, you know, there's still poverty, there are still ghettos, you know, but they've been updated to a point to where it's like a film. It's just has been slowly covered over, but it's still there, it still exists. And more or less, I try and take these things and get them to a point to where I can relate them to my people. And not only to my people, but no, I take that back. Once I'm capable of relating it to my people, then I try and extend it into another realm. What I'm more or less concerned about, I think I related again this earlier, I'm not concerned about what white America has done to black Americans per se today. You know, what I'm concerned about is what black America is doing to black America, you know, which I think is probably the most significant factor and the most significant theme that a black writer today has to write on, or a black poet today has to write on.
We'd like to start off this program by visiting with one of America's brightest young poets and playwrights. She's the author of Sassafras, Cypress, and Indigo. We caught her on a recent promotional tour through Portland, Ms. Ntozake Shange. She'd given controversial voice to the frustrations of the Afro-American woman, and she'd done it with a lot of struggle and finally in grand style. She took her play, or choreo poem, for colored girls who've considered suicide when the rainbow is enough, from one-night stands in cafes in Oakland all the way to Broadway. She's written several other works, among them Photograph, Lovers in Motion, and Nappy Edges. Her newest work, Sassafras, Cypress, and Indigo, looks at the lives of three sisters, three black women from the American South.
This lady just asked me, what does it mean to have too much South in you? And that's one of the things that's funny about that, because it's not possible. Part of the reason I wrote that is because it's not possible. And I'm from one of these families that, when they migrated north, just started getting rid of it. You know, you would ask somebody how we got here, and my grandmother would say something about some kind of boats, and then you'd say, well, were we slaves? No, we were never slaves. There were any slaves in our family. I said, well, that's odd, because you said we were on the boats and about the white people. But no, we weren't slaves. And so it took me until I was 28 years old to go back where my family was only 2 generations removed from, which was less than a day and a half drive from where I had been raised. And when I first got to South Carolina, I was totally freaked out, because every time I turned a corner, I would imagine that there were these black people who were slaves walking all around down there. And it was very, very emotionally traumatic. It wasn't scary, and it wasn't unpleasant, but it was filled up. It's like sort of like having a baby. Like, it's not quite bad, but it's very strange. And so it's sort of like that. And so then when I left there, I went back and I looked at my family and I said, you know, this is so strange, because as much as we thought we were Northerners, there's so much about us that's just like these other relatives I just left. that I've never seen these people. And we were all the same. And that's when I realized that what had been saving our family was what they had been trying to get rid of, by educating it away and doing all these strange things to it. And so I said, okay, we're just going to write a nice story about some northern girls who were essentially Southern, because all black people are essentially Southern.
One of the things one hears off and on in Portland is that, well, there's just not enough support for theater in Portland. Now, I know that's one of those things that when you're starting off and you're trying to get people together to come and act, you know, that thought is lingering in the backs of their minds. Why am I doing that? Is that just just speculation or sort of silly rumor, or?
I think that it's I think it's a concept. I think when you don't have a lot of success outright, if you're not in Chicago or LA, then you have to find a way to explain it away. And one way to say it is to blame it on somebody else, to say there's no support. I don't think you traditionally have in Portland a theater-going black community audience. You have some people who go and some people who don't, just like everywhere else. And the people here are just fewer. And what we're about, and what I think Sojourner is about, is bringing theater to the community, letting them see it is accessible, it's viable, it's a good way to spend a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Friday evening. And in a sense, bringing an audience and a company together in a way that hasn't traditionally happened is a way of garnering support, if you will. But it's something that hasn't happened in the past, where things have always been downtown or someplace else. And that's what I think. I think it's a concept.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I comment on that? I tend to disagree with you, Michael, about Portland not having a black theater-going audience. I think from our June 19th show, we expected maybe 250 people at the most. Mm-hmm. And we had so many people, we didn't have enough chairs to seat them. It was 100-degree weather, and people were standing against the walls. It was phenomenal. And that proved to us that Portland does have a black theater-going audience, and that there are people here who are willing to come out and support and really enjoy coming to hear and see black theater. I think it depends on what type of support you're talking about. And that way, people coming out, I think there's a tremendous amount of support. On the other hand, if you're talking about funding, money coming from corporations and things like that, we've ran into difficulty there. People seem to have their budgets already written out and give a certain amount of money per year to certain organizations, and it's already fixed. And they'll say, well, come in at the beginning of our fiscal year, we'll see. And, you run into a lot of problems like that. So I think it depends on what kind of support you're talking about.
Sojourner Truth Theater, now 3 years old, has been bringing theater to the community by performing in parks, in schools, in nightclubs, wherever they feel they can reach people and demystify the idea of black theater. Well, in addition to performing original plays, members of Sojourner Truth enjoy performing black poetry. Here are two members of Sojourner Truth, Ayanna Patterson and Pam Smith, performing a few of their favorite pieces.
There's something that my mother always told me. She said, "Child, never offer your heart to someone who eats hearts. One who finds heart meat delicious but not rare. Someone who'll suck the juices drop by drop and bloody chin grins like a god. Now never offer your heart to a heart gravy lover. He will sop up your grief with bread and send it shuttling from side to side in his mouth like bubble gum. But if you happen to find yourself in love with someone who eats hearts, these are the things you must do. First of all, freeze your heart immediately."
We'd like to begin this edition of Moving Together by visiting with Joyce Harris of Portland's Black Educational Center to talk about Kwanzaa, a 7-day African-rooted holiday that's being celebrated by an ever-growing number of African Americans.
Kwanzaa was created in 1969 by Ron Karenga as a holiday that people of African descent could celebrate and that would be meaningful to them.
Now, who is Ron Karenga, for those who may not have encountered him?
Ron Karenga was the founder of an organization known as US. I believe it stood for United Students. And I think it was in the Berkeley area, Berkeley, California. And Karenga was one of the people who was into what we might call cultural nationalism. He was about trying to develop different cultural kind of things that African Americans could celebrate. And as a consequence of some of the things that he had done, he came up with this whole idea of Kwanzaa, which was based very loosely on the harvest celebrations that are held in some parts of Africa. And he used that as kind of like the starting point for his creation of Kwanzaa.
I'm Art Alexander, and welcome to Moving Together. In this edition of our program, we're very happy to present to you the music of one of Portland's best jazz fusion bands, Lights Out. Lights Out is made up of Kerry McCoy on piano, Damian Dillon on drums, John Mutsako on bass, Greg Dalton on guitar, Tony Collins on trumpet, and Dennis Springer on saxophone. We'll be talking with Tony Collins and Dennis Springer, band leaders, a little later on in the program. But for right now, here's Lights Out.
I started in school, and nobody really took the time to really sit down and say, do this, don't do that. I just started basically on my own, basically. The reason why Dennis and I both are doing this thing is because we feel as though, or I feel as though, that we owe a certain amount of our talents to be distributed to some of these young people who can also someday be very fine musicians, which I think they will be real soon.
I started basically with Dennis Springer's group about 4 years ago. I'm not, originally from Portland, and I don't go back in the Cotton Club days, but...
Tony, on a personal level, why are you a musician? What do you get out of it? And if you had all the daily necessities taken care of for you, what would you be doing in music?
Well, I'm a musician because I started when I was 10 years old, and I've been playing for 15 years. And the reason why I chose to be a musician is because I like playing. I have a love for playing trumpet. I have a love for satisfying a listener, and I like to leave, just basically leave something behind, you know, a style of music maybe, or just something that would satisfy someone.
We'd like to close this edition of Moving Together with the voices of Portland's Youth Sound Choir, as led by Ken Berry, as they performed at Vancouver Avenue Baptist Church for Youth Night. I'm Art Alexander for Moving Together.
Wishes to honor 4 selections of black-oriented programming, preferably from within the system which we deem outstanding in overall presentation, which has to do with subject creativity and set design, theme development, and technical transitions. The programs must be submitted to NDPC by August 14th. They will be judged by a jury of persons of note. Now, I'm not sure, I didn't write this. I don't know what the persons of note I write, but there are always persons of note who judge things like station managers and executive producers and program directors, etc. The selections will be announced August 29th at the NDPC banquet. So all of you out there who think you have produced an outstanding production and it has aired, how about sending it in and let us take a look at it? You might be a winner. Now, okay, guest speakers for the conference will be